I live in a small village where everyone knows everyone. The days are quiet, and the nights are even quieter. Life here moves slowly, and nothing much changes. At least, that's how it was until she came. Her name was Asina. She moved into the old hut at the edge of the village, the one no one had lived in for years. It was a strange place for anyone to live, so far from the other homes and so close to the forest. But when she arrived, no one questioned it. The first time I saw her, she was walking to the well. Her beauty made me stop in my tracks. Her skin was smooth and dark like the river at night. Her hair fell in thick, shiny braids, and her eyes, they seemed to hold a secret. She carried herself with grace, and when she smiled, it was like the sun had come down to touch her face. My brother Tumi noticed her too. Tumi was older than me, always chasing after pretty girls, but something about Asina caught him in a way I'd never seen before. He started finding excuses to be near her. If she needed water, he'd offer to carry it. If she was fixing her roof, he'd show up with tools. I laughed at first because that's just how Tumi was. But soon, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. Asina didn't talk much. She was polite, always greeting people with a soft voice, but she kept to herself. Some of the older women in the village said she was hiding something, but the younger men didn't care. They were all smitten, but Tumi, he was in deep. One evening, I asked him about her. "Don't you think it's strange?" I said. "We don't know where she came from or why she's here. And why does she live so far from everyone else?" Tumi rolled his eyes. "You're overthinking, as usual. Not everyone has some big story. Maybe she just wanted a fresh start." I wanted to argue, but I let it go. Maybe I was overthinking. But something about Asina didn't sit right with me. The village started to notice the changes in Tumi. He stopped spending time with his friends. He stopped joking around with me. He even skipped the weekly market trip with our mother. All his time went to Asina. One night, as we sat by the fire, I brought it up again. "You've been acting strange, Tumi. It's like she's put a spell on you." He laughed, but it wasn't his usual laugh. It sounded forced. "You sound jealous," he said. "Jealous?" I snapped. "I just don't trust her. Don't you think it's odd that she never tells anyone about her past? Or that she's always gone during the day?" Tumi shrugged. "Maybe she's private. Not everyone needs to spill their whole life story." I wanted to say more, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Tumi was lost in her, and nothing I said would change his mind. One evening, I saw Asina again. She was walking back from the well with her clay pot balanced on her head. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. As she passed, I felt a chill, even though the air was warm. She looked at me and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about her smile kept playing in my mind. It wasn't the kind of smile that made you feel warm inside. It felt wrong. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the crickets outside, until I finally drifted off. But then I heard it. A soft, haunting melody floated through the air. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, pulling me from my sleep. I sat up, straining to hear. The sound was coming from outside. I got up and peered out the window. The moon was full, casting a silver glow over the village. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, in the distance, near the forest, I saw a figure. It was Asina. She was standing under a tree, swaying back and forth. Her head was tilted back, and she was singing. The song was beautiful, but it sent a shiver down my spine. There was something unnatural about it. I watched her for a while, frozen in place. Then, as if she sensed me, she stopped singing and looked directly at my window. I ducked out of sight, my heart pounding. Did she see me? I didn't dare look again. Instead, I crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket over my head, praying for sleep to take me. The next morning, I told Tumi what I saw. "She was singing by the forest," I said. "It was like she was calling something." Tumi laughed, shaking his head. "You have the wildest imagination," he said. I'm serious, Tumi. There's something off about her. He frowned. You don't know her like I do. She's kind, and she's been through a lot. Just because she's different doesn't mean she's dangerous. But no, he said firmly. Leave her alone. I wanted to argue, but I knew it was pointless. Tumi was blinded by her, and no amount of reasoning would change his mind. As I watched him walk away, a sense of dread settled over me. I didn't know what Asina was hiding, but I was sure of one thing. She wasn't just different. She was dangerous. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. I couldn't get Asina's song out of my head. It haunted me, playing over and over like a broken record. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing under the tree, swaying and singing, her voice drifting through the night like a ghost. For a few days, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only going to get worse. It was late one night when it happened again. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard the sound. The song. It was faint at first, just like before, but it grew louder and louder, filling the air with its eerie melody. I sat up, my heart pounding. My hands trembled as I pulled back the blanket and crept to the window. The moon was full again, bathing the village in pale light. The world outside was still, but the song was clear now. It was coming from the same direction as before, near the forest. I knew I shouldn't go. I knew it was dangerous. But something about that song pulled me in. It was like it was calling to me, begging me to come closer. I grabbed a lantern and stepped outside. The air was cool, and the grass felt damp under my feet as I followed the sound. It grew louder as I got closer to the forest, until finally I saw her. Asina. She was standing in the same spot as before, under the big tree near the edge of the forest. Her head was tilted back, and her arms were stretched out like she was reaching for the sky. Her voice rose and fell, the melody twisting and turning in ways that made my skin crawl. But it wasn't just her voice that unnerved me. It was her shadow. The moon cast her shadow onto the ground, but it wasn't moving the way it should. Asina swayed gently, but her shadow twisted and jerked, like it had a life of its own. I froze, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I could only stand there, watching as her shadow writhed like a snake. Then, suddenly, she stopped singing. The silence was deafening. Asina lowered her arms and turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. "Who's there?" she called, her voice sharp. I ducked behind a bush, my heart racing. I held my breath, praying she hadn't seen me. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard her footsteps. They were soft, but they grew louder as she walked closer. "I know someone's there," she said. Her voice was calm, almost playful, but it sent a chill down my spine. "You don't need to hide." I stayed where I was, my body trembling. I didn't dare move. The footsteps stopped. "If you saw something, you should forget it," she said. Her voice was lower now, almost a whisper. "It's better that way." I waited, holding my breath, until I heard her footsteps retreating. When I finally peeked out from behind the bush, she was gone. The next morning, I told Tumi everything. "She saw me," I said. "She knew I was there." Tumi frowned. "You were spying on her? Seriously? You need to stop this, brother. You're obsessed." "I'm not obsessed," I snapped. "There's something wrong with her, Tumi. She's not normal." Tumi shook his head. "You don't know what you're talking about. Asina's a good person. She's kind, and she's been nothing but good to me. Just because she's different doesn't mean she's bad." "But I saw her shadow, enough," he said, cutting me off. "You're just jealous. Admit it. You don't want me to be happy." His words stung, but I didn't respond. I could see there was no point in arguing. Tumi was too far gone. That evening, I decided to keep watch. I sat by the window, waiting for the song to start again. Hours passed, but the night was silent. No singing, no shadows, nothing. Maybe she knew I was watching. Maybe she was waiting for me to let my guard down. Or maybe Tumi was right. Maybe I was overreacting. I was starting to feel foolish when I heard a knock at the door. It was Tumi. He was grinning from ear to ear, holding a basket of fruit. "Asina gave me these," he said, setting the basket on the table. "She said it's her way of saying sorry for scaring you last night." I stared at the basket, unease bubbling in my chest. The fruit looked fresh, but something about it felt wrong. "I'm not eating that," I said. Tumi sighed. "You're unbelievable. She's trying to make peace, and you're acting like a child." I didn't respond. I just pushed the basket aside and went to bed, my stomach churning with unease. That night, I dreamed of Asina. In the dream, she was standing in the forest, her shadow twisting and writhing at her feet. She was singing, but her voice was different now. It was darker, deeper, filled with something primal. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were glowing, and her mouth curled into a smile that was too wide, too sharp. "You can't hide from me," she said. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. As I sat there in the dark, trying to catch my breath, I realized something. This wasn't just about Tumi anymore. Asina knew I was watching her. And now, she was watching me. Days passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Asina was watching me. Everywhere I went, I felt her presence. When I went to the market, I swore I saw her standing at the edge of the stalls, her eyes fixed on me. When I fetched water, I thought I saw her reflection in the river, even though she wasn't there. I tried to act normal, but it was getting harder. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and worst of all, I couldn't convince Tumi to listen. "She's in your head," Tumi said one evening as we sat by the fire. "You're letting your imagination run wild. I'm telling you, Tumi, something isn't right about her." He sighed. "You don't know her like I do. She's kind, and she's been through so much. You should hear some of her stories." "What stories?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. Tumi hesitated. "She doesn't like to talk about it too much, but she lost her family. She says that's why she came here. She needed a fresh start." I scoffed. "And you believe that?" "Why wouldn't I?" he snapped. "Not everyone is hiding something. Just because she's private doesn't mean she's dangerous." I didn't argue, but I didn't believe him either. If she was so innocent, why did she only come alive at night? Why did she sing in the forest, with her shadow moving like it had a mind of its own? One evening, I decided to follow Tumi and Asina. I knew they were meeting by the river because I overheard Tumi telling her earlier that day. He thought I wasn't paying attention, but I was. The sun had just set when I crept out of the house. I stayed in the shadows, careful to keep my distance. When I reached the riverbank, I spotted them sitting on a fallen tree, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I crouched behind some bushes, straining to hear their conversation. "You must think I'm strange," Asina said, her voice soft. "I think you're amazing," Tumi replied. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It sounded sad. "I'm not like other people, Tumi. I don't care about that," he said. "I care about you." Asina looked down at her hands. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she whispered something that made my blood run cold. "You must never follow me at night," she said. "If you do, you won't love what you see." Tumi laughed nervously. "Why would I follow you? I trust you, Asina." "I'm serious," she said, her voice firm. "Promise me, Tumi. Promise me you'll stay away." He hesitated, but then he nodded. "I promise." I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. I wanted to jump out of the bushes and shake some sense into him. How could he not see what was happening? How could he not realize she was dangerous? The next day, I tried to talk to Tumi again. "She told you not to follow her at night, didn't she?" I said. Tumi's eyes widened. "You were spying on us? You're missing the point." I snapped. Why would she say that unless she's hiding something? Don't you see? She's not who you think she is. Toomey shook his head. You're unbelievable. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and you're trying to ruin it. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need your protection, he said. Stay out of it. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Asina's words in my head. Asterisk. You must never follow me at night. If you do, you won't love what you see. Asterisk. What did she mean by that? What was she hiding? I decided I couldn't wait any longer. If Toomey wouldn't protect himself, I would have to do it for him. I waited until the moon was high in the sky before leaving the house. The village was silent, and the air was heavy with the smell of damp earth. I made my way to Asina's hut, keeping to the shadows. When I got close, I saw her slip out of the door and head toward the forest. I followed her, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me. Asina walked with purpose, her steps light and quick. She didn't carry a lantern, but she didn't seem to need one. The moonlight lit her path, and she moved as if she knew the forest like the back of her hand. I stayed close, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but I knew it wouldn't be good. Eventually, she stopped in a clearing. There, under the light of the full moon, she began to sing. Her voice was haunting, just like before. But this time, it was louder, more intense. The air around her seemed to shimmer, and her shadow began to twist and writhe on the ground. Then, something impossible happened. Her body began to change. Her arms grew longer, her fingers stretching into claws. Her legs bent at strange angles, and her back arched as if something was pulling her upward. Her face elongated, her jaw widening to reveal sharp, glistening teeth. I bit down on my hand to keep from screaming. When the transformation was complete, she let out a low, guttural growl. Her glowing red eyes scanned the clearing, and for a moment, I thought she had seen me. But then she turned and disappeared into the forest, moving faster than any human should. I stayed frozen in place, too terrified to move. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. Asina wasn't human. And now, I was sure of one thing. Toomey was in danger. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Asina's face twisting into that thing. Her claws, her teeth, the glow of her eyes, it was burned into my mind. When the first light of dawn broke through my window, I made up my mind. I had to tell Toomey. I didn't care if he thought I was crazy. He needed to know the truth. Toomey was outside, fixing a fishing net when I found him. He looked up and frowned as I approached. You look like you haven't slept, he said. I need to talk to you, I said, grabbing his arm. It's about Asina. Toomey groaned. Not this again. I told you, she's not human, Toomey, I blurted out. I saw her last night. She went into the forest, and I followed her. She changed into something else. He pulled his arm away, glaring at me. What are you talking about? She's a monster, I said, my voice trembling. Her body changed. Her arms grew claws, her face stretched. She's hiding something from you, Toomey. She's dangerous. Toomey stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. You're insane. I'm not lying, I shouted. Why would I make this up? I saw her with my own eyes. Maybe you saw something, but it wasn't her, he said firmly. Asina's not a monster. You're just jealous because I care about her. This isn't about jealousy, I shouted. I'm trying to save you, Toomey. She's going to hurt you. Toomey stepped closer, his face inches from mine. Stay out of my life, he said coldly. Asina and I are happy, and I won't let you ruin that. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, shaking with frustration and fear. That evening, I decided to go to the village elder, Baba Kofi. Baba Kofi was the oldest man in the village, and he knew more about the world than anyone else. If anyone could help me, it was him. I found him sitting outside his hut, smoking his pipe. He looked up as I approached, his wrinkled face calm and kind. "Ah, my boy," he said. "What brings you here so late?" I sat down across from him and told him everything about Asina, her strange behavior, her warnings to Tumi, and what I had seen in the forest. When I finished, Baba Kofi was silent for a long time. He stared at the ground, his pipe resting in his hand. Finally, he spoke. "What you describe, it sounds like a tokalash." I felt a chill run down my spine. The tokalash was a creature from the old stories. A shapeshifter, it could look human, but it wasn't. It was a spirit, neither alive nor dead, and it fed on the life force of those it lured in. "But why would she come here?" I asked. "Why to me?" Baba Kofi sighed. "The tokalash is drawn to the vulnerable. Perhaps your brother's love for her made him an easy target. Once she has him, she'll drain him slowly, leaving nothing behind. There must be a way to stop her," I said desperately. Baba Kofi nodded. "There is, but it will not be easy. You must confront her directly, under the light of the full moon. Spirits like the tokalash cannot hide their true form in moonlight. But be warned, she will not let you stop her without a fight." I swallowed hard, fear gripping my chest. "What if I fail?" "If you fail," Baba Kofi said gravely, "your brother will be lost. And so might you." That night, I couldn't stop shaking. I wanted to be brave, but the thought of facing Asina terrified me. I wasn't a warrior or a hero. I was just a brother trying to save his family. But I couldn't let Tumi fall into her trap. I waited until the moon was high, then made my way to Asina's hut. The village was quiet, and the air was thick with tension. When I reached her door, I hesitated. My heart was pounding, and my legs felt like they might give out. But I couldn't turn back now. I raised my hand and knocked. The door creaked open, and there she was. Asina smiled when she saw me. "Oh, it's you," she said. "What are you doing here so late?" "We need to talk," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. She stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. The inside of her hut was small but tidy. A fire crackled in the corner, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "What's on your mind?" she asked, sitting down on a stool. I took a deep breath. "I know what you are," I said. Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I said. "I followed you into the forest. I saw you change. I know you're not human." For a moment, there was silence. Then Asina laughed, a cold, sharp sound that sent chills down my spine. "So, you've been spying on me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I had to," I said. "You're using my brother. You're going to hurt him." Asina stood up, her eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. "And what are you going to do about it?" she asked, her voice dripping with menace. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. "I'm going to stop you." She smiled again, but this time, it wasn't a kind smile. It was sharp and cruel, like the edge of a blade. "You're brave," she said, stepping closer. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with." Her shadow on the wall began to shift and stretch, twisting into shapes that made my stomach turn. I took a step back, my heart racing. "Stay away from Tumi," I said, my voice shaking. "This is your last warning." Asina tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing. "You should worry about yourself, little brother," she said. Then she lunged. Her attack was fast, like a shadow come to life. I barely had time to react before she was on me, her claws slicing through the air. I threw myself backward, crashing into the table behind me, but the pain in my back was nothing compared to the fear coursing through my veins. Asina wasn't even trying to hide her true form anymore. Her limbs were twisted and elongated, her teeth bared in a predatory grin. Her glowing eyes bore into mine, and I felt like I was being hunted. "You should have stayed out of this," she hissed, her voice low and guttural. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the first thing I could find, a wooden stool, and swung it at her. It connected with her shoulder, and she staggered back, letting out an unearthly growl. You think you can stop me with that? She sneered, her voice dripping with malice. You're nothing. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and bolted for the door. My heart was pounding, and my lungs burned as I ran, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear her behind me, her footsteps unnervingly light despite her monstrous form. The moonlit village felt like a maze, but I knew where I needed to go. Baba Kofi's words echoed in my mind, asterisk. You must confront her directly, under the light of the full moon. Asterisk the clearing. The one near the forest where I had seen her sing. That was where this would end. I burst into the clearing, the moonlight pouring down like silver rain. The air was cold, and the sounds of the night seemed distant, muffled by the pounding of my heart. Asina emerged from the trees a moment later, her monstrous form fully illuminated by the moon. She looked even more terrifying in the light, her skin stretched too tightly over her bones, her claws gleaming like knives. You should have left well enough alone, she said, circling me like a predator stalking its prey. But now you've forced my hand. I'm not afraid of you. I lied, gripping a heavy branch I had picked up along the way. Her laughter echoed through the clearing. Oh, little one, she said. You should be. She lunged at me again, faster than I thought possible. I swung the branch with all my strength, but she dodged effortlessly, her claws grazing my arm. I cried out in pain, stumbling back. You're only making this harder on yourself, she said, her voice mocking. I gritted my teeth, my mind racing. I needed to do something, anything, to stop her. My eyes darted around the clearing, searching for an advantage. That's when I saw it. The tree. The same one where I had first seen her singing. Its branches stretched high above us, thick and sturdy. An idea began to form in my mind. I backed toward the tree, keeping my eyes on her. She followed, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was enjoying the hunt. What's your plan, little brother? She asked, tilting her head. You can't run. You can't hide. Just give up. I didn't answer. Instead, I dropped the branch and climbed onto the tree, my hands gripping the rough bark. She stopped, watching me with a mixture of amusement and confusion. Do you really think that's going to save you? She asked. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for a thick branch above me and began to pull. It was old and cracked, barely holding onto the trunk. If I could just, the branch snapped free with a loud crack, and I swung it down as hard as I could. Asina tried to dodge, but the branch was too large, and it caught her across the back, sending her sprawling to the ground. For a moment, she lay there stunned. Then she let out an ear-splitting roar, her body convulsing as she began to change again. Her limbs grew longer, her claws sharper, her eyes glowing brighter. She wasn't holding back anymore. I knew I couldn't fight her, not directly. But maybe I didn't have to. Baba Kofi had said the Tokalash couldn't hide its true form in the moonlight. Maybe that was the key. Maybe the light itself was the answer. I climbed higher into the tree, positioning myself above her. She snarled, her glowing eyes following my every move. You think you're clever, she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. But this ends now. She leaped at the tree, her claws digging into the bark as she climbed after me. I waited until she was almost within reach before I jumped, landing hard on the ground below. She let out a roar of frustration, turning to face me. But now, she was fully in the moonlight, her monstrous form illuminated for all to see. I picked up the broken branch, holding it like a spear. You're not welcome here, I said, my voice trembling but firm. She hesitated, her glowing eyes narrowing. For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face, fear. The moonlight seemed to burn her skin, smoke rising from her body as she let out a guttural scream. She stumbled back, her claws raking at the air. This isn't over, she snarled, her voice distorted and filled with rage. Then, with one final, ear-piercing shriek, she disappeared into the forest, leaving nothing but the smell of burnt earth behind. The village was quiet the next morning. No one mentioned Asina, and it was as if she had never been there at all. But Tumi wasn't the same. He didn't speak to me, and he avoided my gaze. I knew he was angry, but I also knew he would be safe now. That was all that mattered. Baba Kofi told me later that the Tokalash rarely returns to the same place after being driven away. But he also warned me to stay vigilant. Spirits like her don't forget, he said. And neither should you. I still see her sometimes, in my dreams, in the shadows at the edge of the forest. Her voice still haunts me, soft and sweet, luring me back to that night. But I won't go. Not again.